The last Football Manager came out in late 2023, with its database being locked over 2 years ago. Every year, or it used to be every year, I would make a Wonderkid list of the top 20 Wonderkids in the game based off of their hidden attributes. And it's now been so long since the last Football Manager, we can tell you whether Football Manager was right about all 20 of those guys from FM24. And for each of these 20 Wonderkids, we're going to give Football Manager's guess of how good they could be a rating from 1 to 10. 10 being good, obviously. But to do that, I'm gonna have to watch an old video of myself, which is always terrifying. We'll start with the hairstyle, which could best be described as Albert Einstein gets really into soccer. Football. Football. You know the thing where no, wrong again. Number 20, and we start with number 20. Kendry Páez. The 16-year-old Ecuadorian midfielder was one of 47 signings by Chelsea, it seems, over the last calendar year. And Kendry Páez was one of the most unknown players that's going to be on this whole list at the time. He was somebody that hadn't really made an appearance for Independiente del Valle yet, and yet Chelsea had already come knocking and guaranteed that they were going to bring him over when he was 18 years of age. But his attributes in Football Manager at the start were exceptional. But he was one of those players that everybody agreed was fantastic. He was called up to Ecuador's senior national team before Football Manager actually locked its database. And in the 2 years since, he's gone on to make 18 appearances for Ecuador's first team. He was also called up to the Copa America squad for Ecuador, where he scored a penalty against Jamaica, making him one of the youngest goal scorers in Copa America history. With Independiente del Valle, he made 51 appearances over 2 seasons, scoring 12 goals. And now he's joined Chelsea, where he's been loaned out to another team in the blue group at Strasbourg. So while legally he wasn't allowed to move to Europe at any point in these last 2 years, he's done about as well as you could hope. We'll give Kendry Páez a really solid grade of 9 out of 10. Number 19. Arda Güler. The 19th best Wonderkid on FM24 was Arda Güler, and this is one of the guys whose situation has probably changed the least. After he was put on this list as one of the best 20 Wonderkids, the very young, creative force at Real Madrid, who'd just moved from Turkey at the time, suffered some injury problems, and it looked for all the world like he might be a flop. He made only 10 appearances in his first year in La Liga, but patience, and it paid off. He made 28 appearances last year, and while he hasn't been this absolute world beater, for the 19th best Wonderkid from Football Manager, getting 28 appearances in La Liga with Real Madrid last season in such a ridiculously stacked attacking group is an accomplishment in itself, and a very rare example of Real Madrid being able to actually show patience in this situation. Not to mention, on the international scene, Arda Güler was an important part of Turkey's run to the quarterfinal at the Euros. So our final grade on this rating: 8 out of 10. Could be better, but it seems to be about as on the nose as it possibly could be. Maybe a 7.5. Maybe an 8. Number 18, Alejandro Garnacho's. Garnacho. He's basically the oldest guy on this list. He was 19 at the time and obviously already becoming a regular part of the Manchester United team. At the time the database dropped, he was 21 appearances into his Manchester United career. He also, at the time this database dropped, had a striking resemblance to Aldhelm from the show The Last Kingdom. Thank goodness that haircut has been relegated to the bin of history. Now, in his first year after this database came out, he was a very regular player in a first team that would, while underachieving in the league itself, go on to win the FA Cup title, and of course he would score the goal of the season with a ridiculous bicycle kick that absolutely deserved that Premier League award. And he showed a penchant for scoring goals in bunches. He actually had multiple braces, making him the first teenager in Premier League history, or the first teenager since Michael Owen in pre-2000 era, to score multiple braces in one season. But the following year, this past year, was not as kind for Garnacho. He continued to be the subject of fan abuse, as Manchester United once again was playing well below fan expectations. He had some run-ins with the fans, he was dropped from the squad completely by new head coach Ruben Amorim at times, and now he is the subject of transfer rumors from the perennial Premier League vacuum that is Chelsea. So things haven't quite gone according to plan for Alejandro Garnacho, and what should have been the 2 years where he cemented himself as one of the stars of the team, instead he's turned into another potential has-been winger in the Premier League. Of course, he is still only 21, so a lot of that could change, but right now I'm going to give their rating a 5 out of 10. I mean, he did win the Puskas Award deservedly. Number 17. Antonio Silva. The Benfica center back enjoyed one of the most ridiculous rises you've ever seen over the past calendar year. He was part of a collection of incredibly talented center backs that ended up making this list and dominated Football Manager for the next 2 years as the sort of Wonderkids signings you wanted to make to solidify your back line for the next decade. But he was notable, as I even mentioned in the video, for his meteoric rise. He appeared out of nowhere over 12 months, going from somebody no one had ever heard of to making the World Cup team. And anytime somebody rises that quickly, you're wondering if they're going to continue on that trajectory or if it was a bit of a fluke. With Silva, he somehow seemed to find a middle ground. In the year following the game's release, he played basically every game for Benfica, but Benfica wasn't quite as good as they had been. And then in the summer after that season, he went to the Euros with Portugal and played a disastrous match against Georgia where he made some mistakes. He conceded a penalty. He got a lot of shtick from the Portuguese fans, and then when he came back to Benfica the following season, he found himself not in the plans as much. He's still been used fairly regularly as a substitute, but he's not been the person that goes in and plays every minute for Benfica anymore. He still appeared in 23 games. He's still somebody in the national team picture. He just hasn't seemed to progress as a continuing Wonderkid and has just become a good player at the Benfica level. As such, I'm going to give this one a rating of 4 out of 10. That feels harsh, but the trajectory this kid was on, you expected more. Number 16, the guy that probably felt really hard done by the signing of Harry Kane, Mathys Tel. And he's at a very interesting time because he was a rising star in Bayern's team right as Harry Kane was brought in. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Bayern Munich to add arguably one of the best 2 or 3 strikers in the world to their team for a respectable fee. The problem is that signing cut Mathys Tel back into the periphery when the likely chance was that he would start to be able to cement himself as a regular first-team player. At the start of the database, the French striker had made 22 appearances and scored 5 goals for Bayern Munich. In his first season after the database was released, he was your kind of spark off the bench type of substitute, and over those 2 years, he made nearly 40 appearances for Bayern Munich. But by February 2025, it was clear that he wasn't really in Vincent Kompany's plans as somebody to use regularly, so he was loaned to Tottenham for the rest of the season. And then after participating in Tottenham's trophy drought-breaking performance in the Europa League, he was brought in by Tottenham for a fee of £30 million, which, based off of what Mathys Tel is projected to be capable of, that is a bargain. But given the fact that Mathys Tel was arguably the most promising young striker in Europe at the time that this database dropped, and that's where he was projected to be by Football Manager, I'm only going to give this a 6 out of 10. Keep in mind, we're talking about somebody that played regularly for Bayern Munich and then transitioned to Tottenham to deliver a trophy. It's not like he's been underperforming, even though it kind of feels like he has been. Harry Kane got in the way. To number 15, it's another center back in Portugal. This time it's Sporting, Ousmane Diomande. The 15th best Wonderkid was Ousmane Diomande, another one of those center backs for the center back collection. He plays for the Ivory Coast national team and Sporting, and while Antonio Silva's been maybe a little bit more up and down, Ousmane Diomande, more so than almost anybody on this list, has been Mr. Consistent. He'd only made 13 appearances in the league for Sporting by the time this database had dropped, when they were projecting him to be this fantastic player. He'd also not made an appearance for the Ivory Coast national team yet. Since the database has dropped, he's had 2 consecutive seasons making at least 40 appearances in all competitions for Sporting, and playing at an obviously very high level. He also was called up to the Ivory Coast national team right around the start of the 2023 season, and he was a part of the squad that won the Africa Cup of Nations for Ivory Coast, even though he only played in 2 group stage matches. He's since made a total of 8 appearances for Ivory Coast, scoring 1 goal. If he continues to play at the level that he is at, it is likely that somebody is going to come calling to Sporting for Ousmane Diomande sooner rather than later. But right now, he is one of the best center backs, if not the best center back in the Portuguese league. And considering where he was when Football Manager guessed that he would be that, I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10. He's delivered. Number 14, Manchester City right back, Rico Lewis. Well, that was probably an obvious layup for Football Manager here. Rico Lewis had already made 14 league appearances for Manchester City when this attribute page dropped for an 18-year-old fullback, midfielder, whatever. It seemed destined for the right stuff. Remember what Manchester City was 2 years ago. They were like a talent factory. Pep Guardiola saw the greatness in Rico Lewis right away, and after the Football Manager database dropped, he got a new 5-year contract, and over the last 2 years has been a staple player regular for this Manchester City team. Obviously, last year not being their shining moment, but it was last year where he became a full-time regular first-team player, making over 40 appearances for Manchester City. And at the start of this season, where he is right now, he's expected to continue to be that. He's one of the players that, despite the struggles last year, Pep Guardiola seems to continue to trust. And while, like I said, this was probably an easy thing to nail for Football Manager, I gotta give this a 9 out of 10. I mean, Rico Lewis has basically become a regular player on one of the best teams in the world. He's come out of the same position as a guy like Matthijs Tel, but really found his place. Number 13, Estevao. Yes, you probably never heard of this dude. Well, you probably heard of him now. The 13th best Wonder Kid was Estevao, or Estevao Willian. And at the time that this database came out, this was an insane call by Football Manager to put Estevao as high as they did. Because he was a 16-year-old that had just started to crack the first team of Palmeiras. And even they acknowledged that he wasn't very good right now. I mean, these are the attributes they gave Estevao at the start of the database. Just not very good. But they gave him huge potential. He didn't make his full professional debut until December of 2023, and yet this has still worked out brilliantly for Estevao. He would go on to make 31 top league Brazilian appearances in the 2024 season, scoring 13 goals. And in the middle of that, Chelsea showed up with an offer of 34 million euros up front, with I believe it's like 23 million in performance-based incentives as well for this Estevao kid. By the end of the 2024 season, Estevao was being called up to the Brazilian national team. Everybody was acknowledging how good this kid had become. He made his debut in a 1-0 win for Brazil in World Cup qualifying and now has 5 appearances as he has joined the Chelsea team for this upcoming season. And he has, in fact, already at the time of this recording, appeared in both of Chelsea's Premier League matches. So unlike somebody like Kendry Paez, who they loaned out, Estevao has gone from not having made a professional debut yet to I'm a player at Chelsea that looks like I'm going to be a regular. That's a 10 out of 10 pull by Football Manager. Number 12, Ajax defender Jarell Hato. And this kid is spectacular. And I remember even at the time, this was similar to Rico Lewis. He seemed like a sure thing, no doubt. Unlike Estevao, his ability was already at a very high level. And that is exactly what ended up happening in real life. I mean, at 17 years old with attributes that look like this, he instantly became a first-team regular. I mean, irreplaceable first-team regular for Ajax in his first season after this database came out. Over the course of the season, he debuted for the Dutch national team for the first time in November of 2023, while still 17 years old, by the way. And he compiled 2 very impressive seasons overall in Eredivisie, making over 30 league appearances in each of those seasons, and a kind of ridiculous 29 European appearances over those 2 years combined. This led to, of course, a transfer to Chelsea for £35.5 million, which I believe is a bargain. Shout out to Chelsea for buying so many of these players. It's like they're playing Football Manager in real life or something. But now Jarell Hato projects to be a regular player for Chelsea in the Premier League, which means I'm going to go ahead and give this one a 10 out of 10 as well. It felt like a can't miss at the time, and it turned out it was a can't miss. And the last player outside of our top 10, João Neves. The 11th best Wonder Kid was another kind of can't miss hit on João Neves. Now, in Football Manager, even at the beginning, his ability, his attributes are just off the charts for somebody that's 18 years old. The only reason he ended up at 11 on the list is because his potential ability wasn't crazy high like some of the people that we get to later. But João Neves, now in hindsight, feels like one of the most obvious guys you could have picked. He had already made 17 appearances for Benfica by the time that this list came out, and it was clear that going into the next season, he was going to be a feature player. And in fact, in the first match of the 2023-2024 season, he was named man of the match in a 2-0 win over Porto. And he hasn't really looked back since. He delivered a brilliant season where he clearly looked like a player that had the ability and the potential to play at a higher level as somebody 18 going on 19. This led to the biggest transfer we've seen on this list of 70 million euros to PSG. Of course, he spent the last season being a regular in an up-and-coming brilliant midfield at PSG that now might be considered the best midfield in the world. This took him all the way to the Champions League final, where he played 84 minutes in what was, you might remember, a bit of a blowout win. So if I could give higher than a 10 out of 10 for Football Manager's call on this, I would. João Neves delivered everything and more of what his potential said that he would, and he's already done so. Yeah, 10 out of 10, obviously. And the top 10 starts with Italian center back Giorgio Scalvini. Number 10 is Giorgio Scalvini, but I definitely want to put an asterisk up next to this one because Giorgio Scalvini suffered a major injury. The first season after this went up for Scalvini, he was, already in the Italian national team. He was this regular starter for Atalanta and Serie A. He played very well. 33 appearances in the league, 8 appearances in Europe. He even played in the Europa League final that Atalanta was able to win, bringing home a European trophy. But then in the same match that he actually scored his first goal of the season in, he tore his ACL, basically causing him to miss all of last season. So I'm going to give him a 7 out of 10, just as a passing grade for he was doing what he was expected to do before the injury. It's really this season that we're going to find out if Scalvini is back and continuing to improve after tearing his knee. And unfortunately, he's not even the only person on this list with a catastrophic injury. So with number 9, we go from a well-known quantity in the Italian national team to a guy you might never heard of, especially if you're not from England. Mikey Moore. Now, there are guys like Scalvini that feel more obvious, and then there's guys like number 9, Mikey Moore. All right, Mikey Moore was somebody a lot like Estevao, but even maybe in a harder position where he hadn't really made a first team appearance or been around the first team a whole lot by the time Football Manager gives him this crazy potential ability. He had just signed his Scholars contract with Tottenham at the time. He was, of course, still not very good, and when the database was locked, he was 15. And it would take until May of 2024 for Mikey Moore to actually break into the Tottenham team, which of course still made him one of the youngest players, actually the youngest Tottenham player in Premier League history at 16 years old and 277 days. But the problem is Mikey Moore, although incredibly young, over the following season only made 19 appearances for Tottenham, only 10 of those in the league, with 5 being in the Europa League earlier on in the competition and 2 each in the FA Cup and the League Cup. I say that he still became the youngest English goal scorer ever in a major European competition when he popped a goal in against Elfsborg in the Europa League. As for where he's at now, Tottenham's looking to get him a lot more game time, so they've actually loaned him out to Rangers for the following season. But because of how ridiculously young Mikey Moore was at the start of this whole process, I feel uncomfortable giving him a particularly bad rating, but given the fact that they gave him bona fide world-class superstar potential, I'm going to give him a 5 out of 10. He still could have a fantastic career, though. He just hasn't burst onto the scene yet. Number 8, and this somehow feels like a demotion, is Youssoufa Moukoko. The number 8 best Wonder Kid was, and this is just a throwback, Youssoufa Moukoko. Youssoufa Moukoko used to be the Wonder Kid. He was first on the list, and I said even at the time when this database came out, it felt like a demotion for the now 18-year-old to not be considered to have that sort of potential. But to be honest, even when this database came out, you could feel the writing on the wall. Moukoko, over the 2 years since he'd burst onto the scene, had not progressed beyond becoming a potential super sub, right? He had not progressed into somebody that you wanted to have starting your matches. And it just didn't feel like that jolt was going to be coming. And it ended up being kind of the worst case scenario for Youssoufa Moukoko since this database came out. He continued to be the kind of super sub for Borussia Dortmund in the first season after the database, 5 goals and 20 league appearances. But then to try and jumpstart his career, he got a loan to Nice last year. And that loan, it didn't go particularly well. He made 22 appearances and scored just 2 goals. Obviously, a number of those appearances off the bench once again. This led to a player who was once valued as the premier Wonderkid striker in the world, transferring to Copenhagen in the Danish league for 5 million euros. He started his season there well enough, and Copenhagen's playing with a chance to get into the Champions League stage, but going from being the chosen one, at least, I can't hold that against him, but going from being the 8th best Wonderkid on Football Manager's last database to a 5 million euro transfer to Copenhagen to try and find some form is a miraculous fall off. And even though Youssoufa Moukoko is going to be remembered as one of the greatest youth players in the history of Germany, he just hasn't been able to make it work. I hope he's able to recapture the excitement, the explosiveness that he had earlier in his career with Copenhagen. But right now, you got to give this one a 3 out of 10 because Football Manager and most everybody else missed on Moukoko, at least for now. Which brings us to number 7, which is another player that feels a bit like a demotion. It's Endrick, the forward that Real Madrid spent 70 million on that still isn't joining them for like another 2 years. The 7th best Wonder Kid was also also kind of a demotion. He was number 1 the previous year, and that was Endrick. This was, of course, when Endrick was still in Brazil, but he had already started to be downgraded from the unbelievable Messi-like potential he had when he burst into the game initially. Feels kind of cruel considering he was 16. Regardless, after he was put on this list, he was called up to the Brazilian national team for the first time. He would go on to make 14 Brazilian appearances over the last 2 years, which is obviously a huge success. And he would end up completing the 2023 season in Brazil with pretty significant success for a kid that was, 16 years old. His stats not looking too dissimilar from somebody like Esteval, who we saw earlier. But when he made the jump to La Liga with Real Madrid, it didn't quite go well enough. Probably because he was being compared with somebody else that we're going to see later on this list. But when you are billed as the second coming, you kind of have to burst onto the scene right away. And that's not exactly what Endrick did. But I feel like I'm being overly harsh on Endrick. He was the youngest goal scorer for Real Madrid in Champions League history with a goal against Stuttgart in his debut in the competition. He became the youngest Real Madrid La Liga scorer, foreign Real Madrid La Liga scorer at 18 years and 35 days. He finished as the joint top goal scorer in the Copa del Rey. And then right towards the end of the season, he picked up a hamstring strain. Kind of kept him out for the Club World Cup. The reports of Endrick's demise have been greatly over-exaggerated. He's been given the number 9 shirt for the upcoming season, and I'm still going to give him an 8 out of 10. For basically, I think, living up to most of, and maybe even surpassing a bit, the billing that Football Manager gave him in the last database. But now it's time to enter the Matrix for number 6, because this player is at Brighton and Hove Albion. It's Irish striker Evan Ferguson, 6th best wonder kid in the world, playing at Brighton. And Ferguson was a beast in this Football Manager game, consistently becoming a dream number 9 for any number of the largest clubs in the world. And his trajectory started well enough. He scored in the first match he played in the Premier League season in 2023-2024 after this database came out. The problem is he only scored 5 more times. 36 appearances in all competitions and just 6 goals. His struggles continued the next year, which eventually led to a January loan to West Ham where he didn't score in 8 appearances. And all of a sudden, Evan Ferguson, this raw but potentially brilliant player, was failing to reach the level everybody seemed to think that he would. To try to mix things up, he's been loaned out to Roma for this season, and I trust Brighton to be able to develop young players, but it's not been there at all for Evan Ferguson. Think about all of the players he was ahead of on this Football Manager. He was ahead of Jean Neves on this Football Manager database, and Ferguson has not been able to deliver on it so far. But as of right now, Football Manager's guess of how good Ferguson was going to be gets a 4 out of 10. He's not become a Premier League star, and in fact, he's become a bit of a Premier League project. And it starts with number 5, Vitor Roque. And Ferguson's not the only disappointing striker left on this list, because at number 5 was Vitor Roque. He was regarded that highly at the time the game came out. If you need a reminder, this is the guy that flamed out and got in a fight with Barcelona and ended up going back to Brazil, but at the time the game was being released, he was moving to Barcelona in that January at the end of the Brazilian season. But over the entire first season, he would only make 14 appearances and score 2 goals. And after a lot of frustration and anger, he ended up on loan to Real Betis, where he also struggled. He didn't find his Anthony gear. He scored 4 goals in 22 appearances, also failing to score in each of his 7 European matches with Betis. This led to Vitor Roque engineering a move back to his comfort zone, back to the homeland of Brazil for 25.5 million euros. But he essentially came over as a potential star player for Barcelona, and while Barcelona went like this, Vitor Roque's stock plummeted. And as you can hear me mention in the video at the time, he had just made his first appearance for Brazil. Well, he hasn't made another appearance. It's been a nightmare run for Vitor Roque, and it earns a 3 out of 10 from me. If he is able to bounce back out of Brazil again and maybe find form with another club, he could still be great. But as of now, he's gone the direction of Gabigol, where he is likely set for a long and very successful career in Brazil if he wants it. Number 4, and finally, we have a left back. But boy, is it a good one. It's Barcelona's Alejandro Balde. It's hard to remember a time where Alejandro Balde wasn't this ascending wonder kid at Barcelona, and unlike some of the other guys we just talked about, his ascension continued virtually uninterrupted. Even by the time this list had come out, Alejandro Balde had already appeared at the 2022 World Cup as a call-up for the injured Jose Gaya. He actually made an appearance in their 7-0 win against Costa Rica, if you remember, in that tournament. The only hiccup for Balde is that he had to undergo undergo hamstring surgery at the back half of the 2023-2024 season, but when he has been fit, he has been fantastic. And he was an everyday starter with the Barcelona team that made that magic run all the way to the Champions League semifinals and found itself champions of La Liga. And to give you an idea of how important he is to Barcelona, before he suffered a minor hamstring setback, he played a full 90 minutes in the last 16 in the first quarterfinal of the Champions League run. And it's entirely possible to make the argument that they would have won that Champions League semifinal if Balde had been fit and available. But he wasn't. What he is just a natural, obvious choice as a star left back for Barcelona. And I give him a 9 out of 10. He hasn't really become relevant to the Spanish national team since, and that is the only reason I'm not giving him a 10. Number 3 is PSG midfielder Warren Zaire-Emery. The third best wonder kid was the midfielder at the beginning of this Football Manager cycle 2 years ago, Warren Zaire-Emery. Obviously, I mentioned earlier PSG's midfield being one of, if not the best in the world, featuring another guy from this list, João Neves. Well, Warren Zaire-Emery is also on the team and a part of that, although not as big of a part. At the release of this database, he was already a regular for PSG. He had in fact played a full season with 26 appearances before the database dropped, going into his age 17 to 18 year. And since then, he has played 2 more seasons as a regular for PSG, but he doesn't seem to have progressed to being one of the best midfielders in the world. He still remains very, very good. But what evidence do I find for that? In the biggest matches of the year, the Champions League knockouts, he did not play a full 90 minutes combined, even though he made a bench appearance in all but 2 of those matches. He's just not PSG's first choice at the position, despite the fact that he was projected to be maybe the best midfielder in the world. It's a tough ask, but when you're number 3 on the Wonder Kid list on Football Manager, you have to be astoundingly great. He's just been good. So I'm going to give Warren Zaire-Emery a 6 out of 10. He didn't fail. He didn't flop. He's still a good player. But that pure world-class talent hasn't shown itself yet. But that was the last non-Barcelona player on the list, because number 2 is Gavi. The second best wonder kid was another trip to Barcelona, and it was Gavi. Right? It feels like Gavi's been around forever, but at the start of this database, he was still just 18. And I mentioned this earlier, there was another player that succumbed to an injury, and obviously that player was Gavi. In November of 2023, Gavi tore up his knee real bad and didn't return to training for basically an entire calendar year. And while he'd worked his way back into fitness and first team relevance that following season, he was mostly an impact player off the bench, and the ascension of Gavi to bona fide every match starter world-class midfielder was put on hold. Much the same as Scalvini, it is this season that is going to determine really how far Gavi has come now that he's got a lot of football under his belt after the knee injury. But considering he was number 2 on the list, and in spite of the knee injury, still just going to give it a 5 out of 10. But he has a 10 out of 10 attitude, and I love watching the kid play. But number 1 is on a completely different level. He is the only player in the entire game that is given 170 to 200 potential ability. 200 would make him better than Lionel Messi in Football Manager at any point, not just now. The player is Lamine Yamal, the Barcelona winger and forward who has burst onto the scene not just for Barcelona, but the Spanish national team at 16 years old. So yeah, I mentioned at the time there was one player on a different level than everybody, whose potential put him even higher than Lionel Messi if it hit on that part of the range. And that was obviously, it's Lamine Yamal, right? And Football Manager absolutely nailed this because it feels wild, but when this game came out, Lamine Yamal was a very different person, player than we knew about. This was the first time Lamine Yamal had appeared in a Football Manager. He had just appeared in the Barcelona first team, and FM took the huge swing of putting him on 170 to 200, 200 being the highest possible rating for potential range. And yeah, do you need me to explain what's happened since? He might win the Ballon d'Or this year. He won the Euros, he won La Liga, he's led maybe the most potent offense in the entirety of club football. He held a birthday party that produced headlines and lawsuits, and he has become, without a doubt, one of the best players in the world right now. That's a 10 out of 10 poll by Football Manager, because even though it was 2 years ago, for Lamine Yamal, it was basically a lifetime ago. Oh, and one more thing. I hope I never get to make this video again, because we need a Football Manager every year to keep track of the freaking Wonder Kids.